Welcome to episode 4 of season 2 of Into the Metaverse. Today we have an excellent conversation where we'll discuss all things gaming in the Metaverse and Web3 era. But before we dive in, we have a short announcement to share. This podcast is brought to you by Roundhill Investments, the advisor to the Roundhill Ball Metaverse ETF. The Roundhill Ball Metaverse ETF, which trades on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker symbol METV, is the largest dedicated metaverse fund in the United States. The ETF tracks an index developed by Ball Metaverse Research Partners, a metaverse-focused indexing and research company headed by industry expert Matthew Ball. For a prospectus and more information, please visit roundhillinvestments.com/ETF/METV. Read carefully. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. Investors should consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses carefully before investing. Distributor Foresight Fund Services, LLC. So today's guest is the fantastic Joseph Kim, or as I like to call him, JK. JK's resume is probably way too long to fully dissect on this podcast, but of note, he's the CEO of mobile game startup LILA Games. Previously, he was the SVP of Games and Digital Platforms at NBC Universal, the Chief Product Officer at Sega Networks, and a studio lead at FunPlus. He's also the managing partner of Game Makers, a great source of information about all things gaming with both podcasts and blog posts. He's also the founder of a great podcast series that he and I participated in, Super Stonk Bros. Welcome, JK.
Thanks for having me.
I had to throw in the Super Stonk Bros. We can't
definitely.
So JK, you've been in the games industry and more broadly tech for quite a while now. You know, you started your own company. You've spoken with lots of great minds on your own podcasts, including Tim Sweeney from Epic Games. That was an excellent conversation. Our favorite question to start the conversation with our guests is always first on our agenda. And so to you, what is the metaverse? And possibly more importantly, as Yoan likes to say, what is the metaverse not?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the metaverse is a little bit undefined. And I think for me, I kind of think about the metaverse as both being partially true and partially false. And maybe I could start with what I mean by that. On the partially false side, I'm a little bit skeptical in the sense that there are so many different potential manifestations of what the metaverse can become. And I think that I don't think it's like so clear and well defined. It's still kind of maturing. And so from that perspective, I think it's partially false just because it isn't that clear. But the partially true part is where, I think from that part, I kind of view it as this probability distribution where it could be some of those things. But I would say part of my understanding of the metaverse comes from you actually, Matthew, where, one potential definition of the metaverse would be like this shared experience space. And we've seen that in particular in gaming with companies like Roblox and Fortnite, where there is, whether it's concerts or whether there's a kind of an experience that people come together to experience together. So that is kind of like one manifestation of the metaverse. I think a second definition is more the Meta, Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg version, which is more closely aligned to kind of bringing the physical world into kind of more of a virtual space, more of the Ready Player One type of experience. The third is more of the definition that we're seeing with kind of like blockchain and Web3, which I don't think it's completely agreed upon, but from a lot of folks that I talk to in that space, it seems like there's kind of this way of thinking about the metaverse more as a transactional layer, and Web3 is kind of like the piping behind that. And so from that perspective, the metaverse can be viewed as kind of like a GUI from the virtual world into the real world. And then the fourth is just the simple definition of the metaverse as just a virtual MMO space, very similar to what we've had in MMO games in the past. So I think for me, those are kind of like the various potential manifestations. And there's other ways in which people think about the metaverse. I think even some people calling the metaverse the internet. I kind of don't believe in sort of that specific definition of the metaverse. But I will say like what the metaverse is not though right now, unfortunately, is like revenue being well defined and being as clear as I hope it can be or should be. But in terms of what it can be, I do think that there is the potential or the possibility for the metaverse to really enable people to do things that they haven't done before. So on the optimistic side, I would say that that's kind of like the positive aspect of the metaverse.
So
I think that's
great,
really
Joe.
interesting. Sorry, I was just going to say, I think that's really interesting, kind of how you broke it down, because, a lot of people we bring on here are super bullish, betting companies' careers on this. And so I think you gave a really grounded take on it. There is this, big probability distribution of opportunities that you talked about, but a lot of them don't exist yet. I mean, even Roblox, which is, you could argue, the only pure play metaverse company that's publicly listed.
Right.
You can't really say that Roblox is a pure metaverse platform. It has metaverse-like experiences, concerts, etc. But, what's the maximum server size? Maybe 1,000 people now? It's still nowhere close to the true vision of this metaverse. We talked about that with Mario from Roundhill on a previous episode where, we're so far away from technically being able to support millions of concurrent users in any of these experiences that, it is, a lot of this is still well beyond the realm of possibility, technically.
Right.
Yeah, and I think one thing I would highlight from what you said, Joe, is that the definitions are definitely blurred at the moment. Like, I think if you recall, and I definitely remember 20-something years ago when the internet really started to pick up, everything was the internet. There were no social media companies, there were no e-commerce companies, right? Every company that was doing something on the internet was an internet company. And I think to some extent, there's some people, and I'm part of them, that think of the metaverse as the evolution of the internet in a 3D frontier, kind of the transition from 2D to 3D, even though not everything will need to be 3D. I think it's definitely valid to argue that there isn't one specific definition at the moment that makes sense for everyone, and I think that's totally normal. So switching gears a bit to talking about a bit more about the company you're actually building now, Joe. So your company, LILA Games, now is building, quote unquote, a traditional mobile shooter, not necessarily aiming to create a metaverse or a blockchain game, which, by the way, is fantastic. Not everyone needs to do that. But you are formulating your business plan, pitching to investors, and building a team. And so how do you guys think about these big mega trends, blockchain gaming, metaverse, crypto networks, et cetera? How do you relate to that, as, if at all, as those kind of mega trends, as you shape not only the vision for LILA Games, the company you want to build, but also sort of the narrative and the story of the company that you share publicly or with investors, and in what way, if at all, these mega trends influence the type of game you guys are building and the type of company you strive to build?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately with any major new kind of capability, we view that as more of an opportunity, right? Like the ability to add a feature or a new type of capability to our game. And so for us, I think that anytime there is something like that, we get excited and we do evaluate those opportunities and see how much of a fit there is to what we're doing. And I think with crypto and blockchain in particular, we actually like it quite a lot in terms of what it could potentially add to our game. And when we were out fundraising for our Series A, we actually had some kind of crypto NFT specific ideas in terms of features that we could integrate. But I do think that for us, what wound up happening for us is that we had like a small section of that in our investor presentation. There was a little bit of confusion, or maybe not confusion, but certain investors wanted us to fully pivot over and said, hey, we'll give you this much money at this much valuation if you just fully come over. And that's kind of like not what we wanted to do. So for us, we actually took that part out so that we could, so that we could focus on the free-to-play aspects of the game, which is what we felt we were stronger at. But to kind of answer the original question, for us, any type of new opportunity or trend excites us. We evaluate it. We try to see if it could fit. We try to see if it plays to our strengths. And I think for us, in terms of like crypto in particular, we think of that for us as a longer term opportunity where once we're successful on the free-to-play side, then we'll we've got some pretty, in my opinion, really cool ideas of how we can integrate that into our game. And so at that point in time, once we have an audience, once we're successful in free to play, that's when we would think about integrating some of those capabilities.
I think that's really important because, it seems like every company that's raising money in gaming is a crypto company. At least that's what it looks like, right? If you do a Google search, right?
Yeah.
But, it is such early days. I mean, even like Axie Infinity, which is kind of the leader of the group, depends on who you ask, but a couple 100,000 active users, right, out of 3 billion gamers globally. So
Yeah.
we are still talking about a very small niche audience. I mean, I don't have the updated numbers, but at one point it was something like 80% of NFTs are owned by 20% of wallet addresses or something like that. So,
Okay.
it is a relatively small audience in the scope of the gaming market. And so I think it's entirely prudent to be excited about these things and to consider them. And at the same time, also understand that, crypto gaming isn't going to overthrow the global gaming market overnight. This is going to be a long process. And we talked with Ryan Wyatt about that from Polygon Studios and about, helping companies make the journey and seeing it as a long haul and building this over time. Because, yes, there will be companies that are crypto native. There will be companies that look to add these features eventually. And all of those are entirely valid business models. But what we need to think about before we even think about that is, how do we make this stuff make sense with gamers? And I don't think we've answered that question yet. And so, I totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah, by the way, Ryan's an investor in our company, so like when we're ready, maybe we can ask him what we should be doing.
And Joe,
I don't know, because he went to Ohio State, so.
well, I'm in Columbus, so all good on that front. But Joe, I'm really curious, as you know, I'm an entrepreneur and a company builder as well with Super Social, and obviously our teams are exposed to information and to news items and trends, and everyone comes with a certain discipline, and so I'm curious, kind of, how are those megatrends also input into internal conversations with your team, with your colleagues, on what type of conversation these trends invoke? Like, obviously we see a lot of kind of antagonism from, quote unquote, the core gaming community around NFTs. And so I'm curious, as you guys, as you said, are continuing your path as LILA Games with your original vision, and yes, there are different ways of how that integrates, but I'm curious how are those trends are integrated into just the day-to-day conversations, and how your team continues to execute on your core vision while these trends are popping from everywhere. Putting aside Elon buying Twitter, it's not a big podcast.
Yeah, I think for us, we try to take a bit of a structured view in terms of how we impact product roadmap. And so ultimately, when you think about a new opportunity of some kind and how that opportunity can be integrated into a product. So I would say that generally speaking, there's like a few primary ways in which I think you can view, let's call it product validation. I mean, I think one view is by understanding or having a specific view of your audience, right? That this is more like the Riot Games approach, where they have a perspective on who their audience is, and then from that, from the perspective of who that target audience is, you can think about a new feature and think about how relevant it would be to that player or that player psychographic. So that's one way. Another way would be oriented around the gameplay, more like a Blizzard approach, and so for these features and how it would potentially impact gameplay. I think for us, we have more of a market-based, or at least our lead game designer has more of like a market-based approach, where he looks at a lot of games and tries to see product market fit in those opportunities, and then from a kind of holistic perspective, see how that would fit into our product. And so I would say, like, depending on the specific lens by which you're kind of viewing your product or product validation or how it fits with the product, that's how we would think about a new opportunity. So, I mean, I think the simplest way to explain it would be more that kind of Riot approach, like who your player is, who that psychographic is, and then whether it would fit. And then, but we have different lenses depending on the specific way we're thinking about the product at the time.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and I think it it ties back to something that I know we've been chatting about a little bit back and forth, and it's when you talk about product market fit and you talk about finding an audience, user acquisition is something that's kind of been upturned in mobile gaming, mobile apps broadly, with Apple and now Google making changes. One of our favorite quotes from season 1 of Into the Metaverse was, the metaverse is the internet built by game developers. That was, Ryan Gill from Crucible. And so, as we think about user acquisition in the metaverse era, clearly this is something that people are still trying to figure out, how do we make this stuff work? How do we effectively and economically acquire users? I think shooters have been, one of the segments of mobile games that have held up well, but, just your thoughts potentially on, kind of where we are in terms of, some of those user acquisition headwinds, and how you think that affects, the potential to bring audiences into future experiences. Let's not just call them games anymore, as Roblox does, but experiences down the line.
Yeah. So just to understand, you're asking about like user acquisition in kind of like the metaverse, or okay. Actually, I recently recorded a podcast with Chris Ye, the CEO of LILA Games, who kind of was explaining Web3 to me. And I thought one of the interesting insights that he relayed was that when you think about compatibility or interoperability between different games, kind of powered by Web3, one of the motivations for actually doing that would be more from a user acquisition perspective, right? And so like if your game would support Bored Apes, for example, then what the motivation for doing something like that would be because that you've got like this audience of pretty wealthy people. And when we think about the current state of user acquisition with with IDFA deprecation and the inability to do things like value optimization, by having like these Web3 communities around different, NFTs or these different communities, and by providing that interoperability layer, that would be, you could view it to some degree as a form of user acquisition, where by supporting that community and by trying to bring that community into your game, you would have a very high value audience. So, I mean, that's, from my perspective, one of the interesting aspects of, Web3, Metaverse, but I haven't thought about anything else from a UA perspective.
I mean, that's super interesting. I mean, we're going from a generation of IDFA targeting and GAID targeting, and now we'll be able to have, Ethereum wallet ID targeting effectively. We'll be able to see every NFT that, all the stupid frog NFTs that I have in my wallet, but all of that lives on the blockchain. And so, you could argue it's even better information than what we were getting from Apple in the beginning, and so I can totally see how, those sorts of technologies can enable really efficient user acquisition.
Right.
So, Joe, one of the things that we're really passionate about when we think about the metaverse really is the empowerment of creators with greater tools, specifically democratizing the access to 3D software, right? Especially, if you subscribe to the worldview that a lot of the metaverse promises the transition, as we think of it, from 2D to 3D internet. And so democratizing access to those kind of real-time 3D software to take everything that we've seen with text, audio, video, and turn it into, distribution formats, very similar to what happened with blogs and podcasts and YouTube videos, into real-time 3D. And this is what a lot of amazing companies, especially a company like NVIDIA, is working on. How do you think about working with and empowering creators in building a games company, both as a creator yourself and as a CEO? And so how do you kind of think about the creator economy more broadly in the context of these megatrends?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally we love it, right? I mean, I think, the ability to have user-generated content has existed for a long time in games, and some of the most popular games today are based upon mods from previous games, in particular Warcraft 3. But I would say that whether it's mods to custom maps to even streaming, as just creating different ways for the audience to interact with the content, it has always been super powerful. And with the potential flexibility and the kind of openness and expansiveness of whatever this metaverse winds up becoming, I mean, I would say that it's clearly going to be something that likely happens and is very valuable. Probably from the perspective of a game developer, the way that I would think about it is like, there's I guess there are some products that are oriented towards UGC, like whether it's Roblox or Minecraft or things of that nature, and then others like us where we have a game. And so for us, I would say like, we don't think, or at least I don't think about the creator tools as a first step, but as something that we definitely want to add. And as the game gains traction, as you gain more players, then again, just creating different ways in which the audience can interact in different ways and to potentially add to the game is something that we definitely want to enable. So whether it's through mods that later turn into new games, or I was just reading about the game Sifu and how Sifun, which is one of the most popular mods for Sifu, gave the developers insight into like different aspects of the game. And so from that perspective as well, right, getting insights into the game based upon what the user community, the player community is doing with those tools that you give them access to.
Yeah, absolutely. Give the people what they want, right? But I think it can be really powerful. I'm thinking, there's, you mentioned a couple of the games, but there's so many, things in history, and even recently, you look at lots of games out there where, they've been, you can enable a marketplace for, skins for things and things like that, things that people create and sell inside the game world. It's clear that there's opportunities for people to express themselves that way, and I think, that's something that Yoda and I have talked a lot about, is this kind of sense of digital self-expression and, being able to, whether it's a metaverse avatar, whether it's a game character, whether it's a skin for a weapon or a skin for a character, whatever, what we present ourselves as in these games, in these worlds, a lot of us think of as an extension of ourselves, and it's
right.
What we want to present ourselves as to that audience, the people we're meeting with. And so I think it's really powerful, even if it's a traditional game and it's not a quote unquote metaverse platform, but, having the ability to express yourself and kind of show off what you believe in and what you stand for, and have the ability to create inside of that environment. I think that's really powerful. And right. I think that, no matter where we have been in the games, whether it's mods for Warcraft 3 that becomes Dota 2, or whether it's a Roblox experience, in today's world, I think that's one of the underlying trends that powers a lot of the demand for this stuff and makes them successful.
Right.
And then, so I mean, switching gears a little bit, but it's definitely just interesting. It's not necessarily metaverse related, but you're starting a company that's based in India, which I think is really interesting. And I definitely wanted to touch on that a little bit, because I think for a long time people know that India is a place where there's a lot of technology industry, but it's always been back office, or for games companies, it's where they, I know Zynga used to outsource a lot of the games that they weren't growing so much, but they were profitable. And so you kind of, all right, now it's going to be managed out of the India team, right? But it's interesting now. I mean, you're starting a company based in India. There's a lot of startups in other segments of technology that are going public and raising lots of money in India. It seems like now is possibly are we hitting the stride for India's tech scene? So just kind of, why is now the right time to be building a company in India, and what makes you so excited about being there?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, when, I mean, Ray Dalio is famous for saying that when you boil a company down, ultimately it's two things: culture and people. And so for us in India, we're hoping to bet on finding people here who fit with our culture, and basically looking for more of a Silicon Valley type of opportunity. Maybe not the current kind of foo-foo Silicon Valley of today, but more of the Silicon Valley of the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. But I think for us, we believe that there are a lot of really great people in India. And so I think the way that most people, or the way that you can view the Indian market, is first the market itself in terms of the player base. And there's certainly a lot of players, a lot of people here. And then the second part is the developer ecosystem. We're betting more on the latter in terms of the ecosystem. I do think we're a little bit early, just given the maturity of the Indian game development scene here. But but I do think that it's a good time, although we are a little bit early. But I mean, ultimately, I think that the reason why we are excited about India is because we are essentially looking for something that I call structural advantage, meaning that it's very similar to like the Amazon concept of, Jeff Bezos once wrote in one of his shareholders' newsletters that they never want to compete on a level playing field. And so for us, when we think about how do we gain long-term competitive advantage, structural advantage, right? So built-in advantage for us, we think about not only the cost structure advantage, but like being able to find those people who want to do something that's not just like another game being kicked over from the US or whatever, working on a new game, wanting to, that can fit our culture really well. And I think these are the kinds of things that, coming from Silicon Valley that I've kind of seen, in my opinion, Silicon Valley's kind of lost its way a little bit. And I don't think we could have, regardless of the cost, I don't think we could have found the kind of people who could have, who would have fit our culture in Silicon Valley today, at least interested in games anyway, right? So we hope to find that here. I do think it's a little bit early because you definitely do have to train. The type of development that we're doing isn't as common here as in other parts of the world, but I think for us, so long as we're thinking about investing in the long term, I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, I mean, I listened to your you did the Indian Game Summit, which was really cool.
Okay.
And I'm sure on Game Makers, everyone can
Great.
go check that out. But one of the things you hit on was an underlying theme that I got out of that, which was, to your point that you made, a lot of the developers that worked on companies that were outsourced games, they those were games that they didn't create; those were games that they worked on, and a lot of people have built up talent, built up expertise in various segments of game development, tech, whatever, and now they have the opportunity, they might have the financial capability because they've, been gainfully employed in the past to build something on their own. And it goes back to what we were talking about a little bit before, and having a sense of ownership and being able to express yourself, and now they can, go and build something and make something. And I think, you guys are entrepreneurs, it's something that I aspire to be, in my future, and it's, when you can take ownership of something and build something, it feels so powerful and so good when it's successful. And so I think that, we kind of saw that in China, a decade ago now, right? Where, it was similar, that it was a lot of outsourced work. And then the Chinese market took off at the same time that developers domestically took off. And, the optimistic case is that India follows the Chinese path.
That's right.
We'll see if it's probably not going to get to the same degree, because I don't think it has the same pedigree as from a consumer perspective of games, but I also think that it's a bet, relative to China, it's a linchpin for the global market. And so, I think that there's a lot of things to be excited about in terms of, you see a lot of the commonalities that you saw in China a decade ago or more, and you've seen what that's become globally, not just domestically anymore. And it gives a lot of optimism over time, if you're willing to play the long game, that India can become kind of the next China, the next frontier for the development of games.
Yeah, and I think like to your point, like China, when I was in China working at Film Plus, it was not the kind of dominant country in Forex as it is today. And so I think what China's done really well is really invested in specific genres, building high levels of specialization. And given that, they've really been able to be very successful, as you've mentioned, but also Turkey as well, right? I mean, we've seen that. Dream Games is a great example of a team that has competed with the best in one of the most competitive markets in the world. And so we're hoping to do that here in India. We're betting on Shooter, and hopefully we'll see similar success over time.
Big dreams, bold bets, swing into the fences, Joe.
Yeah.
That's all we can do as entrepreneurs. So great bets. I look. I've been in India. I've seen the growing entrepreneurialism of the society. I think there is an incredible increase in venture capital overall per capita in India over the last 5 years. Many more unicorns, big investments globally. And I think you're most likely a trailblazer when it comes to gaming being built from a country like India. I think it's a fascinating bet. I think it's also a bet on people working together. We are at a different way building a fully remote, fully distributed organization, people from everywhere, especially North America, which is a different type of bet. And, I think we're exactly the right approach. I think to your point, it's a strategic choice, right? There needs to be a strategy company fit and the type of culture you want to build. And it needs to coexist together alongside all the other things that you need to do as a company. And so, we're rooting for you, that's for sure.
Thank you. Definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, JK is awesome. And, I mentioned it a couple of times, but check out Game Makers, because if you're into gaming, you're into Metaverse. Obviously there's a lot of similarities between the two. There's a lot of great content there. I listen to all the podcasts, and he also has a newsletter that goes with it, and it's really good content. And every now and again you might catch me on there as well.
For sure.
But with that, I think we'll wrap up today's episode. JK, thanks so much for your time. I know it's getting late over in India, and we'll let you go. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks for having me on, guys.